Welcome to another episode of the Link Podcast. Today we're going to be talking about the AV industry and how it is an essential part of modern business today, as well as how Electra provides top-notch AV services throughout the state of Texas and beyond. Joining me to share their expertise on all things AV is Lance Richards, the AV sales engineer for Electra. How are you doing today, Lance?
I'm doing great.
Great, and welcome to the Link Podcast.
Thank you.
So can you tell me a little bit about your background before coming to Electra? You can go as far back as you want.
Sure. I grew up in the Bryan College Station area.
Okay.
I've lived here most of my life. Spent a couple years in Austin and various other closer to Houston areas. Graduated from Bryan High School here in '96. Went to Blinn College for a couple years. Spent a year at A&M and kind of decided wasn't really good for me. I too much partying, you know.
Okay. How it goes
That happens in
sometimes.
college, yeah. So I made it to like a junior level in college and decided to just join the workforce. And I got offered a position at a sign company as IT manager and graphic designer.
Nice.
So I have some graphic designing background that I did for about 8 years for the sign company. Worked for them 8 years, built their whole network. IT was my thing. I love technology. I started building computers when I was 13 and continued to break them and put them back together and fix them, hardware and software. So I learned a lot.
Okay.
Worked, and I've always had that passion for technology.
Yeah.
And so when I worked at the sign company, it wasn't really engaging in that technology as much, except on the, once you set up a network, it's done.
Yeah.
So then I moved on to, well, the owner came to me and said, "Hey, I'm going to sell the business. I'm retiring." He was about 75 at the time. So I was at the time the operations manager as well as the graphic designer. Small business, you wear multiple hats. So it's been kind of a difference at Electralink where I don't necessarily have to do that.
Yeah, you focus on more one thing or a couple things.
Correct. So, but I was the operations manager there, and he's like, "I'm closing the doors." So I applied for a local company that had been doing IT work. And I applied as a PC repair technician because that was my background. I had networking and PC repair. I'm CompTIA certified in 3 different A+, Net+, Security+, which are all PC related certifications. So I got those right before I went to work, and I went to work at that company. They'd been here since 1985, and I joined them in 2008. They started doing AV in about 2000. They started doing things called smart boards. If you're familiar with those, they're interactive whiteboards that go in the front of classrooms.
Yeah.
And so they were doing a lot with that. And I joined them in 2008, and they were like, "Hey, have you ever done AV?" And I was like, "The most I've done is looked up what a projector is and how and make sure it was the right one." I'm like, "Okay, well, that sounds pretty good." I applied for a technician job. They offered me a sales role.
Okay.
So apparently I'd been doing sales and just didn't even realize it. Somebody calls me and says, "Hey, I need a sign." So I go out and survey it. I work up an estimate, provide them an estimate. We win the project.
Okay.
I didn't think I was selling anything, I'm just helping somebody.
Yeah.
And that's been my philosophy going through. So in 2008, I was hired as an account manager. And within a year, I brought in the largest construction project the company had ever done on the audiovisual side. It was a $500,000 project for Texas A&M. I brought that in within the first year. They were very nervous because, again, they were a small business. So I had to wear 50 different hats for that project. I was pulling cable, using Gorilla Snot to get the cables through the conduit. That's actually what it's called. So I was pulling cables on that project. I was helping pull every single cable on that project. Missed one cable on the entire project before, but I also had to be the project manager, and not just the regular project manager that's out there day to day. I had to be the financial project manager as well. So I had to make sure we were on margin. We still were making money on the project, and we weren't losing money on the project.
Yeah.
And I did that throughout that entire project. I had my general manager came to me before the project started. "Hey, all of our project managers are tied up. Can you do it?"
Wow.
"Yeah, I can do it." It was like it felt good for them to trust me to do it. I'd only been there for less than a year, and they were already trusting me with the largest construction project they had ever done.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And that I did so well on that project that I actually got invited to bid on another project about 2 years later for Texas A&M College of Engineering. This was a smaller project. It was it's not a smaller project than the previous one.
Yeah.
But at that time, it would be probably about even with the other project. It was about $1.5 million project. It was a lot of classrooms, a lot of conference rooms, things like that. So that's kind of how I cut my teeth on AV. So I know everything from pulling the cables, doing the schematic designs, as well as doing the architectural design. So I kind of jumping back a little bit to high school, I did take CAD in high school. So I actually know how to work AutoCAD. It's been a few years since I've done it, but I still have that ability. So I can do everything from the beginning to the end. And
that's awesome that you're able to kind of do the whole thing from start to finish.
Well, I think what it really helps me out is it gives me a good perspective of what these people go through. So even some of our estimators, especially at Electralink, one of the things I've noticed is they're from the field. You know, even some of our sales reps are from the field. They have that experience that that day-to-day guy goes through dealing with the challenges that come along with certain spaces. So having that background knowledge helps a lot, and I'm really seeing that a lot in Electrolink, and I like to see that. That's one of the biggest things that brought me towards the company was that kind of philosophy of raising up from within. And so going into a little bit of why I like Electrolink, but
that brings me to the next question. How did you first hear about Electrolink, and kind of what made you want to come on board the Electrolink team?
So this is kind of a funny story. I applied. I talked to Bobby, and I had an interview with Bobby, who is the head of AV for Electrolink. So I talked to Bobby for about an hour, and we kind of chatted back and forth, nerded out on AV a little bit, you know, stuff like that. And I guess Bobby called Rob afterwards and said, you know, hey, Rob, I think this is a good potential candidate. Rob calls me, and he's driving from Austin to Houston, or either from Houston to Austin, one of the others. He's either driving home or he's driving to Houston to the spring office. We spent the entire conversation on the phone.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And I talked to him because that was what was most important to me. It wasn't necessarily financial. It was more along the lines of I'm getting up there in my career. I've been doing this for 15 years. I don't necessarily want to go work for another company like the one I worked for previously that I felt like kind of took advantage of me. And I was working 70, 80-hour weeks, things like that. And it was stressful. I mean, it caused lots of personal issues and lots of issues in just my health care. And I noticed that. And, you know, so after talking to Rob for an hour and 45 minutes, I'm like, hell yeah, Rob, I'm with you. He's like, I was like, if everything shows out the way you and I have talked and you, as management, that was one of my big things. The previous company I worked for, management was not great. And, you know, we had jokes about random acts of management and things like that. So I don't see Rob doing that. And actually, I've been here for almost 2 years now, a year and a half now.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And so it'll be 2 years in August. And I have not seen that. And I also don't see one of the other issues was my concern was if something goes wrong, is the first thing to do blame, or the first thing to do is let's fix the problem. Because that's my philosophy. I don't care who's at fault. It doesn't make any difference. My job is to make sure that this project goes off. So if one of our project managers drops the ball on something, I'm there to pick it up and run with him and hand it back off to him and get him going. So that's my goal, and it's about team, not about I or about blame. And that's one of the great things I've noticed at Electrolink over the past year and a half is it's not about blame. It's about let's get this fixed. And then let's address the management will then address the issue on how to prevent this from happening in the future.
So since you were the AV sales engineer at Electrolink, can you kind of explain to me what your role entails, kind of what you do in a day-to-day, kind of key points?
Okay. So day-to-day, I typically will review construction bids. I work with the sales reps to either have a in-person conference or an in-person meeting or a web-based conference to discuss audio-visual needs. Once I have that discussion, I produce a project requirements document. This goes to our estimation team so that they know what's going on. But before I send it to the estimation team, I send it to the customer. And this document is written for the customer, at least part of it. There's a part of it that's written, it's called the executive summary, and it's going to define what the system does for someone who doesn't know anything about AV. And I've actually, and I've gotten feedback from some of the sales reps and things like that, that I'm pretty good at taking something that's very technical and making it not sound so technical.
Yeah, that's talent.
Yeah. And it seems to work. So I share
Good.
that project requirements with the customer, and then they share it around their organization and come back to me. Yes, this is what we're looking for. And
Yeah.
that's key, because if we don't start a design on the same page with the customer, we could end up 15 pages down the book and the customer's still on page 1.
Yeah.
So we need the customer to come along with us on that journey. So having that project requirements is great.
Yeah.
The next thing I do after I produce that project requirements is, once it goes to the estimator naturally is going to have questions, which is great. I always want people to ask, right? Because again, this is a collaborative effort.
Yeah.
I don't know everything about AV. I know a lot. Our estimators know a lot, but I think together we know as much as possible between 2 or 3 people, depending on the estimator. But we've got years of experience in pulling it all together and working together. And that conversation that I have back and forth, like, for instance, this morning, Brian, I went back and forth on him on how our proposal needs to look to go to a customer.
Yeah.
So it's not just the scope of work or the bill of materials. It comes down to how it should look to the customer too, which I know you do a lot of that as well. And we're working on cleaning that up to make it a little cleaner. But I have some old projects from last year that I need to kind of update to our new look. So I've got him working on that. And, just like me, he gets up at like 5 in the morning and he'll be on his computer 30 minutes later, and him and I will be chatting back and forth. So we don't really go, like, I'm not an 8 to 5 kind of person. I work when I'm needed. If somebody sends me an email, even if it's after hours, which we've got a couple sales reps that tend to only email after hours. And then we've got our estimators. But it works out great because I can work with estimators in the morning, and then I can work with the sales reps in the afternoon. So
that works out good.
Yeah.
Good.
So I kind of bridge that gap. And if you've ever seen the movie Office Space.
I have not.
Okay. There's a guy on there, and they're doing what they call it, consultants come in and they're downsizing kind of thing, and they ask him, so what exactly do you do for the company? And he's like, well, I take the plans from the customer and I give them to the engineers. And they're like, well, why can't the customer just take them to the engineers? Because the engineers aren't people. And then he says, I'm a people person, damn it.
People person. Yeah.
But that is kind of what I do. It's a little more involved than that, because I interpret what the customer is providing, because I understand from the customer's viewpoint really what they're saying when they say, I want to do A. And I want to make sure that I clarify that A, not only to the customer, but to the estimator especially. So the customer needs to understand that when they ask for A, what all is involved with A. Because if you ask for A, it can be done. It's just going to cost you more. And so I go back and forth with the customer on those kind of requirements, on what is a need and what is a want. If you want this, then we can provide it as an option if we feel like it's too big of a price delta. If it's incorporable and the pricing is fine, we're good. So that's kind of the things. And we kind of talk about it. Here's the functionality, you're getting this. And one of the things I like to do in our scopes is provide that functional description for the customer. So that's
good.
I work with estimators on developing that scope as well, because a lot of times estimators are very detail oriented. A, B, C, D, E. They're not, this functions like this. You walk into the room, you do this. So that's part of the things I've been helping add to certain estimates that are needed.
That's awesome. You're kind of like the interpreter between the customer and the estimator.
Correct. I can take the technical and I can interpret it to something that they can kind of understand. Now, sometimes I do go over their heads, and but they let me know, and I kind of go backwards, because I never know what level of technology. It's gotten easier, I will say, since like 2010, because people are more familiar. If you look back to 2010, how big was the iPhone then? It was just coming out and all of this. So, people weren't used to touchscreens. They weren't used to technology. And now it's gotten a little easier because they are used to it.
So much more integrated in our daily life.
Well, and one of the things we like to do is we like to provide an AV system that is very similar to how you operate your phone. Because if you walk into a room and you can operate an iPhone, you can operate it. Or you can operate an Android, you can operate this touchscreen. As long as you can read what's on the screen.
No, that's awesome. What types of AV equipment systems does Electrolink install or handle kind of on a regular basis?
Well, we're a full-service AV integration company. That means we can do everything from a small little conference or huddle space all the way up to a massive auditorium for
Okay.
300 to 600 people with all the AV necessary for both. Whether it be a large auditorium, stadium, things
Yeah.
like that. We handle video and audio transport. It really doesn't matter to us where it's going.
Okay.
It only matters if we have the right drawings. We have the
Yeah.
expertise to do all of it. One of the
Okay.
things that I have brought to the table is on the acoustic treatment side.
Mhm.
Bobby is not as comfortable with the acoustic treatment side, so he had a project come up and he asked us for acoustic treatment.
Mhm.
And Bobby's like, "Hey, can you help with this?" And I said, "Certainly, I can reach out to manufacturers.
Yeah.
We can get this stuff put together. I've done this, 6 or 7 times.
Yeah.
So I'm familiar with the process."
Okay.
And so now I would say we are a full featured integrator. We can do direct view LED walls like what's in a stadium where,
Mhm.
they've got the scoreboard and everything would be direct
Yeah.
view LED. We've got interior ones that we've done as well. We can do your traditional TV video walls, and then we can do all kinds of video transport now.
Okay.
Mhm.
So kind of anything that anyone would need or want,
Mhm.
we can do.
But typically, what Electrolink handles, well, not 90%. I would probably say 60%. Yeah.
Okay.
About 60% of our business is conference rooms. These would be
Okay.
Teams rooms and Zoom rooms, things
Okay.
like that. So a lot of it is a corporation or a company with a hybrid environment, like 90% of them are now. There
Yeah.
are more coming back, but 90% of them are still hybrid.
Okay.
Having these conference rooms to make it almost like you're there. And that's really what the
Mhm.
idea is to feel like you're in the room with somebody
Yeah.
without being in the room.
Yeah.
And that's where the next technology is going. The idea of intelligent video is what's really sparking the change right now. And
Okay.
intelligent video entails individual framing and tracking and things
Oh
like
wow.
that. So, for instance, if we had a table full of 8 people
Mhm.
and one camera, we could have a camera that would individually frame the people as if they were at their own laptop with their own camera.
Okay. Oh
And then the
wow.
beamforming microphones, which is multiple microphones linked together using computers to
Mhm.
steer the audio pickup.
Oh
So if
wow.
I start talking, it knows to focus on my face and boost my audio.
Wow.
So it will take my voice, make it clear to the people on the far end, but also show my face up front. Kind of like we were in a Teams
Wow.
call, except we're all in the same room doing the same thing, and the people on the other end feel like instead of just looking at a large group of table,
Yeah.
they're looking at the person they're talking to.
Okay.
So it gives you a much more one to one. I'm not saying it's where it is now, actually having a one to
Yeah.
one conversation, but we're getting there. It won't be
Okay.
too much longer. With the advent of VR and AR,
Mhm.
eventually my glasses, like I wear, will have a
Yeah.
screen in them. And
Wow.
eventually I will be able to have cameras and screens and everything would all be worn on my face. And I would be able to have these kind of almost in person
Wow.
conversations, and you could be on the other side of the world.
So
Yeah.
crazy. It's cool how it's changing and
Yes.
adapting.
And it changes every year. But
Mhm.
one of the things we always look at, and this is the thing, and Bobby and I have had this conversation, is we
Yeah.
like to be on the cutting edge, not on the bleeding edge.
Yes. That is
We
good.
will only propose what we consider to be the best fit for the customer
Yeah.
for support because everything we supply has a 3-year manufacturer warranty. We supply a
Okay.
1 year with extended.
Mhm.
So we want to make sure that we can service these products for the entire life of the product.
Yeah.
So we're only going to use products that we feel comfortable with, that we have a
Yeah.
good partnership with the manufacturer, that we know the manufacturer will support us as
Mhm.
well as the end user.
What would you say has been the coolest project that you've had a chance to work on? Something that you really enjoyed
So
or
my entire life, I guess my crowning achievement was in 2018. I did the
Okay.
Zachary Engineering Education Complex, 150,000 square feet.
Okay.
It was over 650 million. It was initially a
Wow.
600 million renovation of the Zachary building.
Wow.
This is a building on campus that had a nuclear reactor in
Okay.
the basement
Is that Texas A&M?
at Texas
Okay.
A&M. It's one of the oldest buildings on campus.
Wow.
And I had worked in that building several times. Well, in 2012, 2013, they brought us into that building
Mhm.
with A&M's systems offices, and we discussed how this AV would look in this
Yeah.
space. And initially, the AV was $1.5 million.
Okay.
Went to the next meeting, which was 3 months later, as they're going through the SD and DD design phases. So we were integrated into this project from the very beginning to kind of help and make sure, because they knew it was going to be a very complex project. There was an AV consultant, but we worked hand in hand with that consultant. And we helped them to develop their budgeting and things like that. Once we got to that next meeting, the budget had ballooned to $3 million. So, okay, doubled.
Okay.
Not that big a deal. Then they start showing us plans for the building. And we talked to the consultant, and he's like, yeah, I haven't sent them my new estimate since they went from SD to DD. He sent them a new estimate, $8 million now.
Oh my goodness.
And then that $8 million carried all the way up until we started broke ground. We worked on that project, and of course, we don't get in there for a year and a half.
Okay.
Obviously, after they break ground, we don't get in there for at least a year and a half. And we get in there, and about 6 months before we're ready to start boots on the ground pulling cables, the client, which is Texas A&M College of Engineering, comes to us and says, hey, we've got this new pedagogy we want to do in our classrooms. We want group learning with an instructor that is free to move around and with an interactive panel up at the front so that they can do notes and things like that.
Wow.
We have a couple of technology people we have in mind. We interviewed those companies and said, okay, so brand new learning environment. Teachers had never instructed this way in the past. I walked in there the first day of classes in 2018 in the fall. The instructors were actually using and utilizing the systems the way they were designed.
Wow.
I was floored because I've done smart boards, interactive panels in the front of classrooms. They're just projection screens to a lot of teachers.
Yeah.
There are some teachers out there that will use the technology, but there are, there's always going to be that anywhere you go. There's always going to be those people that are resistant.
Yeah.
It's getting better, but walking in that building, it just made, because basically I had a hand in the instruction of the next generation of engineers in this country. They did classroom, and I haven't finished on the budget, but by the time we got to the end of the project, the budget ended up being $13.5 million.
Wow.
The total project was 13.5. Went to the groundbreaking. The dean of the university comes out. We got this project done on time and on budget. You know how they did that? They extended the duration of the project and added more money to it.
That's hilarious.
I'm like, well, technically that's true. But by far, that is one of my favorite projects I have ever done. And seeing the students actually utilize the equipment, I think was just amazing.
That's awesome.
And then a year later, I got to do another project that was very similar, the ILSQ building for A&M, which was about teaching in the round. It is something that came from Ohio State University. So they wanted to try a different pedagogy in this facility. They called it the 21st Century Classroom Building.
Wow.
And it was about instructor right in the middle of the room with students all the way around them and 8 projectors shining up on the walls all around in a circle. And it was an amazing project, all interconnected. You could take video from the professor in one room and broadcast it over the internet. You could send it to another room. You could send it anywhere in the facility.
Oh my goodness.
It was a completely interconnected system. And we worked very closely with Texas A&M IT to make sure that we had a network that was capable of supporting that video transport. So we used a lot of really cool IP over video kind of solutions for it. And it was an amazing project. And I've talked to the people that use that thing every day. They love it. They said that system is great. They do productions and things. So if you've looked at some of the videos on A&M for undergrad studies and stuff like that, a lot of those were done in that building. They have a full broadcast studio. They have green screens, things like that.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
It's impressive.
It is.
Okay, since the AV industry is an ever-changing industry with new technologies coming out yearly, how is Electrolink making sure that customers are receiving the best equipment and systems that we can give them? But you kind of touched on this before, but if you don't mind just going back and touching on it again.
Yeah. As with all technology, it moves very quickly. There are always bleeding edge things coming out.
Yeah.
And one of the things that Electrolink really prides itself on is if something new comes out and some vendor says, this is something that's going to be a game changer and you need to give it to your clients.
Yeah.
We test it. We put it through the paces before we even talk to the customer about it. That was one of the biggest issues I had with my previous company was manufacturers would come into the clients and say, hey, we've got this coming. Well, come to find out, it's not going to be for 2 years or a year and a
Okay.
half or a year. And then, when COVID hit, you couldn't get anything for 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
So,
Kind of messed everything up for
yeah.
a minute.
So, and actually, there has been a fairly big pause in the AV industry. I talked about
Okay.
intelligent video because that's kind of the next thing. And
Yeah.
that's really the only new thing that's really come out in the
Okay.
last 3 years. IP over video has been developing and has developed and matured now
Yeah.
to where you can actually send a signal from, like I said, the bottom floor of one building all the way to the top floor of that
Yeah.
building, all on the same network. And you can get full 4K video across that,
Okay.
provided you have the right infrastructure. So all of that's all possible now with technology. So after that kind of it's almost like everybody took a deep breath for 2 or 3 years,
Yeah.
especially in technology because of the chip shortage and things like that. So everybody kind of took a deep breath. Then everybody starts moving back into companies, moving back to work in the
Yeah.
environment. So now we're coming in with 3-year-old technology that has changed because it didn't just
Yeah.
pause. There was some development over that, just not like the yearly development. Like we
Yeah.
should be 2 generations ahead of where we are now, but we are where we are. But a lot of these companies are coming back 3, 5-year-old out of warranty. They're like, hey, we need these new rooms fixed.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things we've been doing a lot with property management companies
Okay.
and in companies that are leasing out spaces because they're staying hybrid. They might be 60/40 hybrid and they're like, we have 2 floors of our building we don't use. Let's rent it out.
Yeah.
So
Makes
then they
sense.
call us in to fix those spaces and make it
Yeah.
ready for a tenant to come in. So
Yeah.
that's been great. We've been doing a lot of that. So I will say it has been because mostly I worked public sector, so now I'm moving
Okay.
over to more commercial, and we do less public. We still do public sector. We just don't do
Okay.
it like 90% of the business was public sector at the
Yeah.
other company. I find it's nice. I actually like meeting with it's kind of been a challenge because I'm generally working with an IT guy who's wearing shorts, t-shirt, unkempt hair,
Yeah.
and now I'm going and meeting with executives and things like
Yeah,
that.
that's
So
exciting.
it's nice to be able to do that and then have that ability to have the conversation with a non-technical executive about
Yeah.
how a space would work. And we actually won 2 projects in San Antonio simply because
Okay.
I was able to have that conversation
That's awesome.
with the CFOs of the company
Yeah.
to explain why this would be important to them and how it would
Mhm.
actually save them money and not cost them
Yeah.
money. Pay now for because one of the big things, and I've worked with banks and things like this, one of
Mhm.
the big things, especially on the corporate side, that I like to bring up is dash time.
Yeah.
Anytime you're on the road, there is a greater possibility that you will get into an accident.
Yeah.
And, if you spend, we had banks that would spend monthly, they would spend 6, 7 hours. Because if you think about the state of Texas and you own branches all over the state,
It's a big
everybody
state
has
to
to
get
come
around.
together. Yes.
Mhm.
And they were doing that once a month. And they're like, we have to figure out a better way to do this. And I was like,
Yeah.
yes, you definitely do. I was like, they don't have to be there in person
You're
for
like, I
that.
have the solution.
Mhm. So we ended up buying like little, or we ended up giving them little displays that have the cameras and microphones and
Okay.
everything. So each manager had their own little station. They didn't
Yeah.
have to get up from their desk and make it.
That
And
is nice.
they said that they had over 10 years, I think they had 3 accidents.
Okay.
And they were like, they weren't significant. They were more fender benders. Nobody got really
Yeah.
hurt, but it still cost the money a lot. It cost the company a lot of money.
Yeah.
And they're like, this way, we don't have to worry because they lose that executive for, I don't know, however long they're out for the accident.
Yeah.
They don't get to go to that meeting. They don't get to do all of that. They
Yeah.
don't get to participate. So,
Yeah.
that's been kind of the big thing that I'm seeing a lot of
Okay.
now. But I feel like here in a year or two, we're going to start to see a little more of this mixed reality AR coming in.
Okay.
I still think that's bleeding, not cutting. So that's not
Yeah.
something we propose to clients at any point because we don't feel we're comfortable or we're at the position.
Yeah.
In fact, I've had customers ask me for 360 cameras 10 years ago.
Mhm.
They make them now,
Yeah.
but I'm like, we don't know what they're going to look like. We can't even prepare for
Yeah.
them. We don't know what the camera is going to produce, what signal is going to come out, and how it's
Yeah.
going to come out.
Yeah.
I said, but eventually they'll get there. So while you probably could have found somebody selling a 3D camera in
Mhm.
quotes,
Yeah.
um, they're not technically 3D cameras, and you're having to basically kludge something together to do it. And
Okay.
that's never good. I don't want to get a call from the customer every single time they try to use that camera.
Yeah.
And I know our service department, Ulysses, would hate it. So
Yeah.
So we always look at, can we support it? And I think that's our number one goal. That's always the first
Yeah.
question we ask is, if we put this in here, can we support it? And
Yeah.
the great thing is 99% of the manufacturers are there to help us.
That's
You know,
awesome.
even if we don't sell their product 15 times, 20 times, 100 times a year, even if it's just a few times a year that we
Yeah.
sell their product,
Yeah.
they're always stand behind their product, and they always stand behind their partners, and that's
That's
been great.
good.
And that's a big thing about the AV industry, and I'm sure it's in other industries as well.
Yeah.
But you know, I've really noticed that in the AV industry is there's a lot of manufacturers that just want, they don't obviously don't want you to put in a solution that makes them look bad, because their
Yeah.
name is all over the equipment
Yeah.
too.
You want it
So
to be good and
yeah,
work well and
yeah.
all the things. So the AV division at Electrolink,
Mhm.
what or how is our division of AV different than other companies' AV divisions?
Well, I only have experience with 2 or 3 other AV companies.
Mhm.
I've only worked with one other AV company, so
Yeah.
direct experience with
Speaking
one. Yeah.
from your experience and what you've kind of
Well, as
picked
I
up.
mentioned before, the teamwork
Yeah.
functionality of Electrolink is just it's not about blame. It's about
Mhm.
working together to solve a problem.
Yeah.
When a fire comes out, we're like, "Who's got the fire extinguisher? Let's go put it out." You
Mhm.
know, and we all work together to affect that solution.
Yeah.
And I feel like Electrolink is and it's weird because I worked for a small business,
Mhm.
didn't feel like a family there. I come over to Electrolink, which is
Not really a small business.
4 or 5 times the company I worked for, and I
Yeah.
feel like it's more of a family. And if you have happy employees, guess what? The customers are also happy.
Yes, that is
Because a
very
happy
true.
employee comes in with a smile, a non-happy employee comes in with an attitude.
Exactly.
And that makes the customers happy. And plus, if they enjoy coming into work, they're going to enjoy putting the AV systems
Mhm.
together, because especially with AV, you can
Mhm.
really walk away with something. You can put your hat on something and say, this works. I've
Yeah.
got this projector's working. It looks beautiful on the screen. I've got a nice, huge image, or I've
Yeah.
got this big, huge video wall. And you snap a picture of it for yourself so you can go show your family, this is what I do. Isn't this cool?
You're like, I did this at work today.
Yeah, yeah. So, you know,
Yeah.
having happy employees that really like AV, and that's one of the
Mhm.
things I've noticed, that pretty much everybody has some sort of passion for AV,
Yeah.
whether it be Anthony and our project manager in Austin, who's got that
Mhm.
music background,
Okay.
and just he's got an ear for audio. And
Mhm.
by the way, in audio is the hardest part.
Okay.
Video is super easy because it's a matter of you have a signal or you don't.
Yeah.
Back in the day when it was old analog technologies, yeah, you could have some issues with video, but for the most
Mhm.
part, it either shows a signal or it doesn't.
Yeah.
And then when you start talking about audio, you get acoustics. For
Mhm.
instance, the room we're in now, you can hear the reverb in here. Like if I were doing this, I would sound treat the whole thing.
Oh.
So acoustic treatments are something that nobody thinks about, even
Mhm.
architects. And I've walked into
Okay.
conference rooms with glass walls, hard lid ceiling, tile floors, and then they want 8 microphones in the table. They want speakers all over the room, and you're like, this doesn't work. You
Mhm.
can't. You basically sound like you're talking out of a barrel.
Yeah, that's not good. No one
Uh,
wants that.
Not if you've paid a lot of money for a good conference room. You
Yeah.
don't want to sound like that. So that's always the first question. And those are always the hardest questions, because sometimes you
Mhm.
don't know until you get into the space. You don't
Yeah.
know how audio is going to react. You can do ease models, which is modeling of how sound reflects off the walls and the
Okay.
windows and things in the space. It takes some specialized equipment to do it,
Mhm.
but you can do that. And
Mhm.
but really, without the space being built, you don't know. You're
Yeah.
guessing. And 90% of the time, we're coming in and designing these systems before the walls are up, before the sheetrock's
Okay.
in, before the ceilings are up, you know, because we've got to get in and pull cable. We've got to get in there
Yeah.
while they're building the walls and before they do the framing and things, or as
Yeah.
they're doing the framing and things like that. So,
Mhm.
you know, it's really, really difficult to say, yes, you know, I can look at a room and say, yeah, you're probably going to need some acoustic treatment,
Yeah.
but we won't know until we get in
Okay.
there. And um, a lot of times you just go for overkill in that situation. But
Yeah.
having a lower noise ceiling makes a huge difference in conference rooms. And you will, anybody out there who has a conference room that they've gone to with hard floors that doesn't have carpet, and you ask the people on the other end how you sound horrible.
Yeah.
The technology is not there. Even with AI,
Yeah.
which is coming into the microphone space to kind of block out some of that,
Mhm.
it can only do so much. one of our manufacturers has just come out with a new AI update for their existing sound
Okay.
processors that actually
Okay.
incorporates AI
Oh,
into
wow.
the system so that it gives you a better audio system.
Wow.
I have not had a chance to use it yet. It has literally just come out this year,
Okay.
but that's kind of one of the new things that's coming in is bringing, AIs all over the place,
Yeah.
bringing machine learning. I say AI because that's what everybody calls it now. It's really machine learning.
Hmm.
And they're using past experience with similar sound setups
Okay.
to put that on the chips and say, so the chips can say, okay, well, I've seen this before. I'm going to do this to fix it.
Okay.
And so when you do it through the programming or through the configuration of the sound design, you drop the block in and it basically filters the audio for you
Wow.
intelligently.
It's gonna be interesting to
Mhm.
see how that kind of plays out and what
Yeah.
that looks like when it's
Oh,
more
yeah.
common.
And it's going to come into everything. I mean, you're
Hmm.
going to start to see it on your TV signals, everything.
Okay.
Video signals are going to get interpreted by AI to make them look better.
Wow.
They're already doing it in computer games.
Okay.
So they're already using, technologies that basically upscale what you're looking at on the screen in 3D
Hmm.
renders. So
Wow. Yeah. Okay. What would you say has been your favorite part of the job that you have right now
the
with like
family.
the family?
Yeah, I'll go back to
Yeah.
that. Just working with Electrolink has been
Yeah.
great. Everybody has been amazing.
Good.
So it's, yeah.
Okay. And then kind of to wrap up this conversation, what is the best piece of advice that you could give someone who is looking for a quality AV partner to work with? What are some signs of a good AV partner to kind of go with for your
Sure.
business?
Well, one of the things, the first thing to look for, and this is hard for especially non-AV people to look
Okay.
at, is what products are they quoting you? Are they quoting you consumer level residential that would
Hmm.
go in your house? If anybody's
Yeah.
quoting you anything that goes in your house, then they're not a good company to deal with.
Okay.
The warranties, the support, everything. So that's one of the first things you can look at is what level of equipment they're giving you.
Yeah.
And then the next thing is what kind of support do they have after the sale?
Hmm.
You don't want somebody who's going to come in and sell you an AV system and then be gone every time you call.
Yeah.
One of the great things about Electrolink is it doesn't matter where it comes from. I can have a customer call in directly. I can have a
Hmm.
customer email me and then I email it along. They
Hmm.
can go, I don't know, do we have a ticket site? I thought we had something. No, maybe not. Anyways, but they can go, they can call and talk to our service department directly. They can talk to me. They can talk to their sales rep. They can
Hmm.
talk to even the guy who did the estimate, which will
Yeah.
show up on there. Even our estimators will be able to point them in the right direction,
Hmm.
and we all take it as very important. So as
Yeah.
soon as that email comes in, where it needs to go,
Yeah.
and I will reply to the customer and loop in the correct people to make sure that it gets taken
Hmm.
care of. And I find that helps the customer out a lot because service can take time.
Yeah.
It's not like we have service or anybody. No AV company is going to have service people sitting around waiting.
Yeah.
That's a drain on the company and it's not good for the company. So they're going to have them doing something.
Hmm.
And that's the same way we are. But generally, we get somebody out there pretty quickly. I think every other time we've had an issue, especially here in Bryan College Station, I know Jeff, our project manager
Hmm.
here, does a great job. It's like next day.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's quick.
Yes. He's like, hey, I can get somebody out next day. Or sometimes, that person might be tied up
Hmm.
and he'll be the next day. But it's generally within 1 or 2 days they're there.
Yeah.
And then the quality of components.
Okay.
So, and quality of components is the hardest part to figure out.
Hmm.
But generally, if you can buy it at Best Buy, it's not something you necessarily want to
Okay.
throw in an AV system. It depends on
Yeah.
what you're doing. If you're just putting a TV up for digital signage, it doesn't matter. You can buy one from Best Buy. We're not
Okay.
talking about that. We're talking about AV systems. We're
Hmm.
talking speakers. We're talking sound processors, full integration
Yeah.
systems, that kind of thing. Because, especially in conferencing, having an even audio across the entire space, and that's not, making sure that the company is doing best practices,
Hmm.
which is what one of the things there is a governing body for audiovisual. It's called AVIXA,
Okay.
and they have several certifications, but they also have a best practices document on how you should do AV. And one of the things
Okay.
that floored me was that coming in, and I don't know if Electrolink said, hey, these are the best practices, we're going to do them,
Yeah.
or if this was something Bobby brought in or something. But when I came in, they were already doing best
Hmm.
practices. So there's been very little where I've actually had to enhance that. And one of those is adding an executive summary to
Hmm.
kind of the scope for the customer.
Yeah.
Because when we get too technical, people's eyes glass over.
Yeah.
They just in one ear, out the other. And it's like, we need your support and we need to collaborate with you. And I guess adding to that last question, someone who will collaborate with you, someone will have an open dialogue back and forth as needed on the AV integration. And that the more complex, the more interactions you need to have. But you at least need to have somebody that's going to answer questions for you and have a dialogue back and forth. You don't want necessarily a designer or an engineer to make assumptions. You want to do that. You want to make sure that you have that conversation. And so a lot of times I will help the estimator in that way too, because an estimator's going in and he's like, I can do it this way or this way. What do you think? And I'm like, well, the functionality changes. Let me call the customer, because it wasn't discussed functionality. It's extra functionality. Do you care? Would you prefer one or the other? And when they say one or the other, then I can go back and get the estimate completed.
I think that's very important, because it's always better to communicate all the things rather than them only know one thing, but then find out it's a completely different thing. Yeah, that's really good.
And one more note on why ElectraLink I think is amazing: communication. My biggest thing my entire career has been communication. It's not hard to send an email. It's not hard to send a text. It's not hard to make a phone call. It's when you don't do it that's a problem.
Okay, well, that's kind of all the time we have for this episode. Thank you so much, Lance, for sharing your AV knowledge with us. I appreciate your time. And thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode of the Link Podcast. I hope that you enjoyed hearing from Lance Richards and his experience in the audiovisual industry, as well as what ElectraLink is doing within it. Stay tuned for the next episode, which drops June 12th. You'll have the opportunity to hear about ElectraLink's DAS division from Sam McDaniels, so you won't want to miss it.